Thank you for joining me in this video series. My name is Chris Germer. I'm a clinical psychologist, also a psychotherapist in private practice, a lecturer at Harvard Medical School. I helped to found the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. I am thrilled that I'm a co-developer of the Mindful Self-Compassion Training Program with Kristin Neff, and lately I've been traveling around the world, mostly teaching mindfulness and self-compassion. In the first video, Kristin spoke about why self-compassion is important, and in this video I'd like to talk a little more about the issue of worthiness. Please stay with me until the end of this video, where I will address worthiness specifically, but first I'd like to offer a personal example of how self-compassion helped me to find my own inner core, my own worthiness. Like many psychologists, we often stumble on an important idea through our own personal struggles. And for me, that was my struggle with public speaking anxiety. I have been meditating for many, many years. I started when I was 25 years old. And shortly after that, I became a psychologist, and then I was launched into the professional world where I had to give a lot of speeches. But at least for 2 decades, I suffered from public speaking anxiety. Actually, once it got so bad that I was giving a talk on mindfulness, which is, supposedly a state of alert tranquility, and I could hardly get a word out. And somebody in the back of the room yells out, "Take a breath!" So that was a low point. I tried everything that I knew in the clinical toolbox to overcome my public speaking anxiety. I exposed myself to public speaking. I accepted every invitation I had. I practiced meditation. I tried acceptance-based strategies, systematic desensitization. I even took medication. Sometimes I would, as I was driving to a place where I had to speak, I would scream in the car, thinking maybe that'll get it out of me, but nothing worked. When I got up to speak, I was terrified. And then, after colleagues and I wrote the book Mindfulness and Psychotherapy in 2005, I knew that I'd have to do a lot of speaking. And in particular, we had a conference coming up at Harvard Medical School on meditation and psychotherapy. And whenever I contemplated having to get up in front of that crowd of colleagues, I was just struck with terror, and with every week, as we came closer to the event, I became more and more afraid. I didn't know what to do. I was really desperate. So then I went on a meditation retreat, and needless to say, when I was trying to be mindful, I was pretty much obsessed with this situation, and I really wasn't very mindful at all. And then I had an interview with one of the teachers and explained my predicament, and she kind of looked at me kind of in a knowing way and said, Chris, why don't you just sit on your meditation cushion and give yourself some love? Just practice loving kindness meditation. Just say over and over again something like, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I live with ease. So I did that. And very quickly, I started to feel really good. I started, actually I was starting to feel so good that I thought I was kind of cheating, because typically I haven't felt that good on retreats. And I think people listening to this who've been on retreats know what I'm talking about. But I also noticed at that time that my awareness became really clear. That is to say, I became more mindful. My field of awareness opened. I was able to perceive thoughts and feelings in a much more subtle way. So I thought, this cannot be a bad thing. So then I went home and I made loving kindness practice my core practice every day. And so there I would sit, and then whenever I thought of this conference coming up, I would just offer myself kindness in the same way I was instructed to do at the retreat. And then eventually this conference came, and they introduced me, and I started to get up to speak. And as I started to get up to speak, the terror rose with me, and I thought, oh no. But then there was another voice sort of in the back of my mind saying, oh, may you be safe, may you be peaceful, may you be happy. And then I looked out at the crowd. There were like 500 or 600 people, and I just got overcome with joy, and I thought, oh, may everybody be safe, may everybody be happy, may everybody be peaceful. And the fear just washed out of my body. First time in my life. It was such an amazing experience. It was an epiphany. But actually, I didn't understand, like, what exactly happened. So I began to explore this a little further, and that's when I came upon Kristin Neff's work and this whole idea of self-compassion. But one thing I also noticed was that public speaking anxiety is actually not an anxiety disorder. It's a shame disorder. And what that means is I was spending so much time trying to work with anxiety, trying to sort of make space for it so that it can come and go, trying to diminish it, anything that would work. But I was always focused on the wrong thing. I was looking in the wrong place. You know, there's that expression, you know, look for the key where it's lost, not where the light is. So where it was lost was in shame. You know, this dread that I had that if I couldn't speak properly, that people in the audience would say, oh, you know, he's obviously a fraud, or he's, you know, incompetent or stupid. This was so upsetting to me, that possibility, that I couldn't go there. I just focused on the anxiety. However, when practicing loving kindness meditation, I actually learned to hold myself in the midst of shame. I was able to be there for myself as I was quivering with shame. I knew that even if everybody in that audience rejected me, that I would still survive. So another way of saying this is, in order to pay attention to our moment-to-moment experience, in order to hold our moment-to-moment experience in a way that we can understand it and transform it, first, sometimes we need to hold ourselves. And that's self-compassion. Self-compassion is the capacity to be with ourselves as imperfect human beings. And the stability that gives and the resilience that gives was a revelation to me. So then I began to look at clinical practice through the lens of self-compassion. And in my practice, I see a lot of people with anxiety and depression. These are two of the most common psychological difficulties in modern times. And what I realized, not just in anxiety and depression, but in most psychological suffering, there's a common denominator, and that is self-criticism, the tendency to shame and blame ourselves when things go wrong in life, as they inevitably will. So self-compassion is actually an antidote to self-criticism. It's the capacity to be kind to ourselves when we suffer, when we fail, when we feel inadequate. And when we're self-compassionate, we also recognize that self-criticism actually has a role in our lives, that it's actually quite natural. In other words, we don't necessarily want to go to war with self-criticism. It's really quite natural. And the way to think about it is that when we feel under threat, we naturally have a fight, flight, freeze response. And that is really good for survival. But when the danger is inside of us, then we often become our own worst enemy. That is to say, instead of fighting outside, we become self-critical. Instead of fleeing an external danger, we abandon ourselves. And instead of freezing, we kind of get stuck in our heads. And this is what we call an unholy trinity of responses that occurs when we are under siege internally. What's interesting about self-compassion, Kristin Neff's three-component models, is precisely the opposite. Instead of self-criticism, we have self-kindness. Instead of this self-isolation, we have common humanity. And instead of self-absorption or getting stuck in our heads, we have mindfulness, which is kind of spacious awareness. So we're not condemned to have this unholy trinity of reactions when we are challenged emotionally. We don't have to turn insult into injury because of self-compassion. So what's interesting also from a clinical perspective is that self-compassion is actually a kind of a portable therapy. One thing I've learned as a therapist is that one of the main processes that happens in psychotherapy, no matter what approach you take, is that it's a compassionate conversation. It's usually a conversation that's more compassionate than the one that's going on in the head of the person that's coming for therapy. And the idea, the hope, is that it rubs off, that a person can actually take this conversation home, that we can actually kind of dismantle, you might say, the self-critical conversation by somebody absorbing the more benign conversation. But sometimes that rubbing off process doesn't happen very quickly. And it's not uncommon that somebody walks out of the therapist's room and the therapist's voice sort of trails off in the background. And then a person finds himself in the middle of the night kind of twisting in their sheets and, meditation is not working, medication is not working. Maybe one's partner is snoring beside in bed. And what do you do then? What do you do then? That's when you need somebody like the therapist. Well, self-compassion is what can help a person right there. That is to say, with self-compassion, we're actually recreating in our own minds this compassionate relationship that occurs face-to-face in psychotherapy. We're actually learning to activate a compassionate self within us. We're actually learning to talk to ourselves with the same kindness and compassion and wisdom that we receive, or at least hope to receive, in a therapy situation. So we like to say that that self-compassion is a portable therapy because it's something you can do between sessions, and it's something that you can also do anytime during the day or night, whenever you need it the most. So some people say, oh, I don't think I can be very good at self-compassion because I don't feel worthy enough. And it's a bit of a chicken and the egg thing, because what self-compassion training does is it actually enhances our sense of worthiness. But it's paradoxical insofar as the way that we enhance our sense of worthiness is by meeting our feeling of unworthiness with a quality of tenderness and kindness. But at the end of the day, we are worthy. We are worthy of compassion. Every single one of us is worthy of compassion. And why is that, or under what conditions is that so? And that is because of common humanity. When we understand that we are not separate and not alone, that we are in fact connected with the rest of the world, when we have that sense of common humanity, we automatically feel worthy, even if nothing has changed in our lives. So what does common humanity mean? Common humanity means that, you know what? I do fail. Perhaps I didn't, know enough at the time. Or perhaps, I was, maybe I was just too tired, or I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. The fact of the matter is that everybody fails from time to time, and when we fail, it hurts. And we probably wouldn't have failed if we knew more, but we just didn't. So that's human. And it's also human to suffer. It's also human to wish to be loved. It's also human to wish to be happy and free from suffering. We are so much more alike than not alike. And because we are so much alike, why would we ever want to cut ourselves out of our circle of compassion? Let's face it, all of us have the capacity for compassion. Oftentimes, for example, innocent beings activate compassion for us, like children or pets. The heart naturally melts when we see the innocence in somebody. But if you really think about it, we too are innocent. We may not feel that way, but just like a child or just like a pet, we don't know everything that's going on in life, even though we wish we did. We are not in control of everything that happens. In fact, I don't even know the next thing that's going to come out of my mouth, and I'm always happy if it kind of works. We're innocent. We're just kind of moving through. And because of our fundamental innocence, we really cannot and should not exclude ourselves from compassion. We are all worthy. I hope you will join us in the final video in the series where Kristen and I are joined by Tami Simon to discuss how self-compassion changes everything. It sure has changed my life by learning the principles and the practices of self-compassion. I think it's safe to say that I've become a happier person, and also I feel a whole lot more resilient, so much so that I can be right here, right now, having this conversation on this video. Thank you for listening. And now I'm interested to know if there's any area in your life where self-compassion might bring some benefit. So please comment below.